have some new AV equipment, so apologies for the delay. We are going to figure this out. But in the meantime, we'll get going. So thank you for coming tonight. This is the summer vacation edition where we think people will trickle in. And now we'll just go ahead and get started. So this is the agenda for tonight. There's quite a bit going on. There's a follow-up from UIC. There's a follow-up on developments on Ashland. Some new stuff coming up with zoning on 35th Street, and a lot of bicycles. I-55, and also we have a speaker to talk about our project on the riverfront. So Kara's cold storage. So you may feel like the dark ages since that last came up. It has been about a year since DPD had their presentation during one of our meetings at the library to discuss this development. It has been approved. The $28 million project. It's going in on the corner of Pershing and Ashland. And it's going to be exactly what it sounds like. Cold storage, conveniently placed between the stockyards and the produce market where there are existing truck routes for transportation of food. Right now, they are building it on spec. It's a rental facility. They do not have a tenant identified. They expect that a facility of this size will employ approximately 65 people, some full-time, some part-time, and there's going to be jobs that pay $20 or more an hour, typical for the industry, and you don't have to speak English. So this one is kind of a mixed bag for the neighborhood. You know, nobody's like, woohoo, more storage, but on the other hand, it is the right kind of jobs for the neighborhood and for the population we have, and it's in a location where it's going to have minimal impact to traffic because most of that traffic is already going that way. So it'll have 15 loading docks and parking for 12 trucks. They do expect that a lot of employees will walk or take public transportation. Another thing to add about this is DPD lobbied really hard for the facade because one of the things that came out when we had those public meetings about it was, man, this thing is ugly. And the developer made a point that it needed to be all white because it's a refrigeration facility and they need to reflect it to keep things inside cold. And so they've come up with these art screens that are going to be on the outside. And so these are models in the pictures you can see. They are going to be local artists designing them. And there'll be a variety. They've also got a bigger setback with trees. And so again, they're going to try and use some of the exterior elements like all the new tree planting going in on Ashland to help keep things cooler and reduce the energy impact of the facility. So they're going to break ground on this, not right away, but next couple of months. And that's something we can keep an eye out for on Ashland. Obviously, they have to demolish the existing building before anything new.
I had one thing that I don't know how is our communication with the developers? So or not? They just present.
They were above average communicators in the sense that we work them directly at the public meeting. But remember that their minimum requirement is that they only have to do one. They actually did 3 public meetings. And they were very cooperative and they were here. They took questions for like 45 minutes. So it's been a while, but I would say they were above average.
I was thinking, I just drove down there the other day, took a picture of the water. I was thinking maybe if we wanted to shoot them something, is there anything to save the water? Because there ain't too many of those left.
Well, we already had that whole conversation. Yeah, we already had that whole conversation. And so some of the red brick structure, as you can see, the second photo here is still standing. I don't know what the details are. These are the pictures that were released.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think most of you were around for the events with 35th Street a couple of weeks ago. So they did a full study. We have the final report from them. And remind me, I need to send that to your office. And so what they did, they did door-to-door survey of business owners on 35th Street, also a lot of person on the street interviews. They had about 75 people participated in those. We also had about 100 neighbors who came to the community event, which was great. One of those was here. They took stock of the existing physical building conditions, most of which are middle of the road, but some of which, like laundromat, are pretty dire. And then also review zoning and street staging. So if you didn't get to attend those events, the final presentation from the students, then this is UIC's Urban Planning Department, the final presentation for those students are here. So please do take a minute to look at these boards. And I'm gonna go over a little bit more on the slides of what they came up with and what we're doing with that information. So the students came up with three main concepts. One of which is the portal, and they're looking at that as the area around the 35th and Archer L station, and how do you make transportation feel more connected, whether they're on foot or by train or CTA. So they're looking at things like the 6-point intersection at 35th Archer, to make that safer by changing some of the traffic patterns, by having expanded crosswalks, perhaps changing the timing of the light. Also, looking at things like here, with the taking part of the CTA parking lot and making that more of a pedestrian zone into the alley where you could have the street vendors or like maybe booths on the backside of the Family Dollar, that kind of thing. To bring in some more small business and make it feel more walkable and make the alley thereby feel more connected to 35th Street. Because right now, when you get off the alley and walk down to Archer, it's really, really busy, all cars, and then you eventually get to 35th Street. But the reality is, it's only a block away if you change traffic pattern on foot. And so how do you create spaces that make that feel more natural, that you should walk what is actually the shorter way, but because it looks like a place you are meant to walk. So that's the objective of this part of their theory and their recommendations. All right, and then the next thing is going to be the heart of the neighborhood. And the idea here, this came, they're looking at the 35th and Wood intersection. And some of the things that were really cool that they did with this was the way that they're designing for seasonality. So we're looking at things like reutilizing the grade school parking lot in summer when school is out of session as an all ages play space. How can you create kind of those pop-up things that are available in summer, and then of course in winter it's going to be the school parking lot again. Looking at outdoor seating areas and increasing bike connectivity between 35th going north and south. So we're looking at bike lanes down Wood, for example. In this illustration, they've only taken it down to 37th, but we're lobbying for it to go all the way down to Pershing to cover the entirety of the area towards the park. And then this one was the one that was best received at our events, community social hub, and it's the idea of taking the area around the library and again engaging in some of those designing for seasonality and multi-purpose spaces. So things like, what kind of events could we have in the Walgreens parking lot? Could we have food trucks? Could we reestablish the farmers market there? You know, and maybe eventually we can find a permanent home for the farmers market, but this is important. Could we utilize that couple of blocks down Wolfpack, where next to the library, next to the play garden, could that be a space where we have street festivals? And there has been some lobbying, especially the new folks in the 12th ward, to have street festivals here. They are actively seeking ideas for street events that might be appropriate to the neighborhood. Probably a little late for this summer, but I think they'd really like to see that for next year. So how do we do that? And also how do we do that in a way that, you know, makes sense? The residents aren't freaked out about parking. So there's, you know, a limited time frame and everyone knows what to expect, but having that designated area to be multi-purpose in summer. One of the other things they suggested here is connecting the green space next to the library more closely with the play garden. So it feels like one space. Of course, the library does need parking for handicap access and for other, you know, moving heavy things. But, you know, kind of make that area again feel more like you should be walking here. And so looking at ideas for how to do that. So I'll stop here for a minute and take any follow-up questions about UIC before I go into the next step. Yeah.
I'll just say for this, there's parking off the alley of the library. That really should be sufficient for loading and accessibility parking. They really don't need a lot, and they certainly don't need a fence around their lawn. So I think that's a real opportunity there that could be captured just by getting rid of that little itty bitty lot that doesn't have much value and getting rid of the fence around the lawn.
Yeah, it always feels.
It does feel weird. Like,
I was just kind of, I mean, I live on like 36 in Walcott, and I always feel like I should be able to walk right through that little area along those paths, but it's always chained up. You know,
I mean, good point. It's public property. It should be public access. Okay.
It would certainly reduce their maintenance budget. I don't know, because if it's a liability thing, it's why it's fenced off and it's not open outside the library hours. But if that property outside the library could be moved to the park district or something. You can do a transfer between the sister agencies. And that could actually be designated as a public park.
Right.
And then you don't have the accessibility issues where it's only open for library hours, when it's fenced off, it's just there to look for.
And the I don't know if anybody's actually talked to Walgreens, but the utilization of that parking lot is less than a third at all times. There's almost nobody, it's maybe 12 cars ever tops in there. So the idea of being able to utilize that for something else, that would also be. But that, I mean, the easiest low hanging fruit is just, talk to the city about that too. That would make it feel so much more accessible, and you're right, along from the alley, actually, it's off of the next street over, there's the other entrance, there's a bunch of parking right there.
Are you talking about the other entrance to the library or on Winchester? Or are you talking about, yeah, okay, you're right.
There's a parking lot right there already that connects to the alley in between. And that parking lot is about the same as the other one. It's just that everybody comes off Walcott because they come from 35th, turn right and turn right.
Right.
But the only time people usually, there's not a lot of people who usually utilize it. It's usually people are walking from or they park right in front because during the day it's free parking. There's always space.
Yeah, they really don't use that little stuff a lot. The alley lot provides sufficient parking. It just looks deceptively small because the alley is such a certain drop. But I don't know how receptive the park district would be to taking it, because park district does not like the small pocket parks because they're, from their perspective, maintenance intensive. They don't add a lot of value. But if there's some way to just get it out of the library's hand and give it a fence and actually make it welcoming, and
I wonder
Well, maybe-
if there's a way to integrate it with the playground.
That's what I'm thinking, neighbor space will need a play garden, so they would.
There you go.
Be another one.
I'm sure they would be interested. There you go.
Okay,
Yeah, that would probably be your best path.
okay,
And it reduce the library's budgets, then they have one less tax payment to maintain, and they don't have to worry the liabilities of the rest.
can we throw that into our zoning conversation? Yeah,
Does anyone talk to Walgreens about using the parking lot for the pop-ups?
not yet, so we just got the report last week. I mean, obviously, we had events a couple of weeks ago, middle of June, and so, the big thing that we're gonna be moving on quickly here is zoning on 35th Street. And that's gonna get the attention of a lot of existing stakeholders. So, it's a good opportunity to talk about a lot of things, including, like what you're suggesting is maybe there's something that was there too. And there was a lot, and these are all conversations to be had. So with UIC, one of the big things we have to deal with on 35th Street is the fact that this whole area was downsized to residential in 2004. So we have all these empty storefronts on 35th Street that cannot legally be opened as a business. So our approach here is that we're working with the 11th and 12th wards. We're going to have a joint community meeting on August 2nd. So mark your calendars, August 2nd at 6 at the library, where the 11th and 12th wards are going to present a new proposal for zoning. Let me go ahead and skip ahead to this slide. Which I think is the next one. But what's going on there is that's kind of the first step, right? Towards looking at stuff on 35th Street. We've got a bunch of existing conditions. One is that there are single family homes and 2 flat on 35th Street that should not be rezoned to allow for commercial because they're existing homes. So for example, on the block next to the American Legion, that's all single homes through 3 flats. And those people need to be left alone. That's their home. We're not in this to put anybody out of their house. But on the other hand, you go another block over and there's buildings like this one. So this is outside the box catering, which was recently closed. And so that one is zoned as a storefront, allowed to open. And immediately adjacent to them is a storefront that has been converted to residential. So that's where it gets sticky. So the original, there had been a zoning ordinance put forward last spring, it died with the end of the previous city council, it didn't get a proper vote. So that gives us an opportunity to put forward something new that's gonna make a little more sense, because the previous proposal was just a blanket single zoning from Ashland to Archer. And that doesn't work if you live in one of those single family homes, and it doesn't work. Like it was not gonna work for somebody doing it that way. So we're revisiting the issue of DPD, and the new proposal will be kind of block by block. So if you live in a block that's all residential, it will remain residential. But for the places where we have the storefronts, we need to be flexible. So for people who are living in those storefronts, they're gonna be able to stay. That's a priority. But for the storefronts that haven't been converted, we are leaning towards, but have not confirmed, that's gonna be all what happens in 2 weeks. A proposal that will say you have to open this as commercial if it has not already been converted to residential. In hopes that that will drive new business traffic onto the street. So, and that's gonna be ground floor only, the storefronts will be commercial, the ground floor will be commercial, and then people will continue to live upstairs, and that's the way those buildings were designed. The goal here is to right size the zoning for the existing conditions, because the existing conditions were constructed before there was none. So it's just a difference, it's a retrofit in a sense.
Would it also allow for people to choose if they wanted to rezone? Because I think one of the problems was that the decision was made for them to downsize. Could they make the decision saying that more easier at this point? And I think a lot of the residents of the homeowners, the building owners would want the ability to, especially once they saw others moving in, then they'd be like, oh, this is an opportunity. So that, I think the question would be, could they choose to upsell rather than being forced? Like if we weren't making it a forced situation, could they also choose?
That is a question for the older people. However, what I can tell you, what we've been told is that if an existing situation will be grandfathered in, not just to the current owner, but with the building. So in other words, again, if the storefront has been converted to residential, as long as nobody like does a gut rehab or they have to pull a permit,
Right.
then we'll just look the other way. That is my understanding of the way this works.
B2 allows ground floor residential.
Well, this would, I think it's leaning towards B3.
Right, the commercial blocks, but I'm saying there should be 0 residential zone on 35th. I mean, we need to get out of this box where we got the patchwork approach, because that's the problem we have now. It's a mouth with a bunch of broken teeth. And if you don't buy the right piece of property, you can't open a business there. So it needs to be bare minimum B2. B2 allows ground floor residential, so you can pull the permit and you don't run into problems with part of the building.
This is the issue.
Right.
If they
But if you want to open a small business, irrespective of the building type, like it could be a house that want to open a daycare center on the ground floor.
That's different. You don't need
do that.
you don't need these zonings for a home daycare.
Well, a home daycare below a certain size.
Yeah, that's.
I'm saying like a commercial size. Or if they want to run like a small bake shop out of their house and convert like the basement portion to do so, they would be able to do that under a B2, because a B2 is intended to be flexible for these corridors that are just by their nature mixed. And it doesn't cause permitting issues for anyone that owns the building. So
Yeah.
that's where it needs to be at a minimum. We gotta get away from this pattern for residential, where if the property owner wants to change the zoning, then they have to go through all the bureaucratic red tape.
Right.
They have financing on the line that's contingent on them getting the zoning. The financing falls apart.
Yeah.
And that's where we're at.
The zoning is
So-
not whether or not if they're gonna do work for to get a permit to change it, that's on them for the construction part. The zoning is a whole nightmare of red tape, and if they are allowed already, it encourages them now. I mean, I like the idea that like, could it be a mix of B3 and B2?
Well.
would that be?
Yeah. Yeah.
For all the reasons that he just said, the momentum seems to be to make it B3 so that it should be by default commercial.
Right,
Anybody who's currently living there will be fine, but then if you want to downzone to residential, then you have to ask, because the motion is to make it commercial.
right, but what I mean is, so see that person is already converted to residential. If that was B2, then if they decide to renovate, they could go back. Rather than, like, we don't want that to be residential, because if they decide to go back and they become part of the commercial.
Right, and that's actually what we're saying, is that property would be zoned commercial.
Right.
And so if anybody wanted to do, even though it is currently, and if somebody's currently living in it, they can stay, even though it's zoned commercial.
Gotcha, that's,
But if somebody wants to change things up, they can only convert it to commercial.
gotcha,
Does that make more sense?
that's,
Okay, so, public meeting at the library on Wednesday, August 2nd. One of the things I want to point out too, that has not happened in decades down here, is that we have two older people who are talking to each other and they're actually working together to make a plan. And this is a really big deal and a golden opportunity that we want to capitalize on. So we really want to see a good turnout for these meetings. We know that this is an issue that everybody in the neighborhood cares about. Having those basic commercial needs available within walking distance. So please drag your friend, please.
By the way, B3 is great. I didn't even think that they're actually gonna be that ambitious. B3 allows a wide range of businesses, it's not restrictive like B1. So that's great. I'm really glad to hear that they're leading towards that.
Yeah.
At least for a segment of the board.
Absolutely.
But ultimately, where I'm coming from is there should be zero residential on that front of 35th Street.
The one thing is that we don't want to encourage tear-downs of existing homes. And so that's the only place where it's a little bit, but again, for people who are living there, we're not gonna put anybody out of their house, that's.
Right, well, at the same time, though, if someone owns the building on 35th Street and it's not landlocked, that is their purview, they want to sell it to them.
they want.
It absolutely is.
Yeah,
We're not disputing that, but that is a separate issue for this
right. Now, if you
one.
want to talk about like landmarking, that's a separate issue.
Yeah, well, and the other separate issue that I want to be really clear on is I think there's gonna be some fears when people say, oh, it's commercial, we're gonna have a bunch of bars. There are not gonna be a bunch of bars. There is still an alcohol moratorium in effect on 35th Street. And that will be handled as a completely separate issue. It does not, getting commercial zoning on 35th Street does not allow you to serve alcohol. Those are two separate things. So I want to be really clear about that those are two separate things that are going to be handled entirely separate.
Also, taverns are C, so not B.
So,
Okay.
all right. Yeah. All right. Tony, what about bikes? Yeah.
All right, Tony Adams, board member. I'm representing the board on the southwest side neighborhood bike development, which is a CDOT, Department of Transportation, project to jumpstart bicycle infrastructure in neglected neighborhoods. So they had one on the west side and did some stuff. And now the process is moving on. Private park, H park, which I like sort of. We had our second task force meeting yesterday, at which we see that all those things we finalizing the map of what infrastructure is going to happen as part of this project. Sometime in August, so we just still don't know. They unfortunately CDOT claims that Arthur Avenue in Westover was too hard to do this time. At this time, they're aware that it's what we want. But for now, the project is trying to do baby steps, which I guess is better than nothing. All three people from the McKinney Park and Parkers Task Force are pretty adamant that we want pipelines larger. Western is good too, and we're going to be. See that is like, thank you for your opinion. And but we're optimistic this summer. And it might be years before we see them. Yeah, I don't really know enough to answer the question. Yeah,
Go for it.
Have there been any talks about putting protected bike lanes on the bridges over the South Branch of the Chicago River at
Yeah.
Western, actually. So I know Western, I just looked at Western, I think is a county road, and then Ashland is state.
Yeah. Well, the stuff that's included, even if they actually scroll in, this infrastructure projects that they think are gonna happen, probably, they see that's Western up there. Western is, that bridge is scheduled to be, I forget if it's either completely rebuilt or very resurfaced. It's like a hundred. Yeah.
Oh, God, that's good news.
So that, they didn't have.
It's got potholes.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
That's a fun story.
It's.
Unfortunately, they, you know, they did not just cover nothing, so.
What I can tell you too, I talked to the chief of staff of the 11th ward today, and he told me that they specifically are really concerned about Archer and their lobbying because it's IDOT control. But there are, and then I've also heard directly from DPD, from Department of Planning, that they also are working on Archer. So there's stuff going on, and of course we'll get to our bicycle project in a few minutes, where we're going to talk about getting people off of Archer, because that might be faster than replacing and fixing Archer. But what I do want to tell you is that in the 11th ward, they're going to have hard curbs going in the bike lane starting with Halsted. And so we are really hoping that we can be like, hey, they got and play that angle, especially now that we have some overlap between neighborhoods. And those are, he said, this year. So I don't know, that's warp speed for the city. So I'm not holding my breath, but it's really, really good news.
And this is probably all research, but I know Archer west of Western is not state owned, it's just east of Western.
Right.
There's any like easier time there,
Yeah.
bike lanes in Brent Park. I know driving that section is a pain to drive when it's 4 lanes because the road.
Right, that's always, and it's like 2.5 lanes, you know, we have to decide to we refer to that. Scary for everybody. That's like driving.
I believe that timeline, by the way, like the city's really accelerating the rollout of the
Really?
protected lanes. Augusta got one. And they did it with parking bricks. They made a curb out of parking bricks.
Yeah, but now,
That's pretty cool.
and then, and now I've already seen videos from just cars that are just parked completely in the bike.
That's the other thing we need to step up enforcement.
Oh, that's the worst thing with the little
Yeah.
plastic knee-high widgets where people like
Yeah.
put them as go-kart markers.
Yeah, or, you know, like in the South Loop, on Harrison Street, there's a delivery truck next to Dunkin' there that basically just straddles the curb. And it's there, and I think they all over it every morning, and just see it there, blocking the bike lane. So step 2 is enforcement. I know there's a pending ordinance where the average citizen can take pictures of license plates and submit them. I don't know where that sits right now. And that would go through the city's traffic court, not the county, so don't wait on the county system to actually implement that. Because the issue is, if you call someone to come ticket, the car moves by the time the enforcement comes.
Interesting.
So there is that pending, that maybe something to follow up on, but we need enforcement.
There's something that feels a little petty about that, but I would definitely make a 311 complaint about people parking their bike.
Well, I mean, if it's a protected bike lane, it's not just, but if it's protected bike lane, you're parking.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that's part of the conversation you have the 11th ward too, because I think one of the most dangerous places on Archer is in front of that daycare. In like, right, just shy
Right.
of Halsted L, because people don't understandably don't want to walk their kids across the street, so they park in the bike lane and force us
Right.
in big trucks. So, yeah.
By the way, as sidebar, who owns the median in Western Boulevard? Is that still Park District? But who owns that? Like, why can't we just get an off-street path through the median?
This has come up before. I don't know. Do you know if there's ever been anything formal about that, or is it?
I've heard it. I never heard it from Mark.
On the bike path.
Yeah, absolutely. It's done in multiple places. I just don't, like, who owns, I know originally when the Boulevard system laid out in the Park District. But I don't know who has assumed control of it. I mean, obviously someone's mowing the grass.
Right, and trimming the trees.
Yeah.
You know what, that one back here?
Sure.
Yeah. All right, cool.
Thank you.
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you. Okay, so a couple other things before we get to more bites. So I-55. So at the very end of the legislative session, the legislature did vote for the first stage, which is kind of an overgrown study of a proposal to increase the width of I-55. This would be statewide. It is not just here in Chicago, although certainly people are raising a lot, people have a lot of opinions about it. It would include, basically, they would be filling in, sorry, these notes are from Illinois Environmental Council, who was involved in the opposition to this, so to be clear about the source. But basically, you've got, South Northbound Lanes, DAP, southbound lanes. When that was originally built, there was at the same time a thought that eventually the orange line would be expanded to go down the gap, kind of like the blue line goes down, like the red line goes down 94, the blue goes down 294. The idea was that the red orange line might at a future date be expanded by that. So any potential for that to happen here would be gone if they fill that space in. There is also the decades and decades of data that building more lanes brings in new traffic. So, for our concern here in the neighborhood, of course, where we are trying to say, no, we really don't want any more logistics facilities, making it easier for those logistics facilities to operate by bringing in more vehicle traffic is not desirable. So this is in the early stages, so there is still time to voice your opinion. Representative Todd did vote against it, and I believe Javier Cervantes did as well. But there is still time to voice your opinion about what should happen next, because this is the early stages. The other issue is this procurement bill. So, and I should back up to explain how this happened. There was an amendment to kind of a normal every year thing for procurement. But at the very end of the legislative session, amendments only have to be posted for an hour before the vote, which means sometimes people don't even realize that they're there or didn't have a chance to read it. And that is what happened to this particular amendment that will allow an overhaul of state procurement where they can bypass CDOT, where they can bypass MAP. Right. And also gives IDOT, the Illinois Department of Transportation, much broader leeway in terms of pursuing public-private partnerships. So basically, this could allow for something that looks like a lot like the parking meters to have in statewide. And that's the issue with the specific Type 55, the proposed expansion, because they're talking about adding toll lanes that would be privately funded. So I tried to reach out to our electeds today to see if this has been signed. As of last week, the governor had not signed it yet, but because it's attached to a larger bill, it would probably have to be a line item. This one's pretty scary because we all know what happened to parking meters. And the idea that the state can just come in and do whatever they want without any public comment and without talking to our planning authorities who know our area best is pretty scary. So I would encourage you to take a few minutes and voice your opposition to that.
I was gonna say, there's a little bit of misinformation that's being spread about this from the likes of the environmental groups, because they definitely have a particular agenda and respect their opinions on that. But there's the implication that this is taking away a transit option is just flat out false. This was planned with the open median as a potential for rail back in the 1950s. When the Orange Line was built, that option was fulfilled. It was fulfilled with a better corridor where the transit runs through neighborhoods that are accessible rather than a highway median, which typically has terrible ridership. There's already 2 rail corridors in that same corridor that parallel I-55, and any rail expansion can easily happen on the adjacent railroad, especially since Amtrak starts being moved off of there at the Rock Island. And when that happens, you're going to get an increase in cycle service. So we don't need the median anymore as an option for transit. Even if you did use it for that, no one can really walk there because it's a transportation corridor beside the canal.
Well, it's already terrible for walking.
Sure,
And
precise.
I are right that is
Yeah.
back enough in time that doesn't seem likely they would expand the Orange Line. No.
Well, it's just simply not going to happen. Because again, you already have a rail corridor there. Further, Pace does run express buses along I-55, they can only run them at 20 miles an hour on the shoulder. A managed lane will give them the option to actually operate a real express bus service. Because the way a managed lane works And again, it's just a couple of lanes that would become toll. The I-55 is not becoming a toll road overall.
That's correct.
And that's sort of been some misinformation been put out there, that they're converting it to become a toll lane.
It's not gonna be stacked.
Right, so this is something that's done elsewhere in other major cities that aren't as gifted with rail infrastructure as we are. They use the managed lanes to basically operate as a free flow lane where they can throw a bus in there. Because the toll is variable. They increase the toll rate to keep it free flowing. It's just a matter of, is it worth the value of time to jump in the lane and pay a $5 toll?
Sure, I
And
mean,
most people say no, I'm just gonna stay on the free side. So those managed lanes, they do tend to remain free flowing, so. Yes, you're adding capacity that could increase traffic, but you're really not gonna be adding that much more traffic to the core. And the other thing to keep in mind too, this is interstate commerce. We're in the major city center, so there's always going to be traffic passing through across the area, and that just sort of comes with the territory.
and I think there's truth to that, but I would argue that less of it is specifically on 55, because 55 in here. So like, yes, and. And I think your point about the bus lanes, is an interesting one, because it is being proposed, I should say, this was heavily supported by the construction unions. And like, nobody here is against union labor, okay, that's not the point, but the point is, we want to build the right things, right? And so I think part of the issue with it, if they were saying we're gonna build dedicated bus lanes, that would be one conversation that really would be fabulous. But if they're saying that we're going to, change the terms of access, and then it's gonna be a big private money-making entity like the parking meters.
Right.
That's pretty different. So I do agree that there's a lot of shades.
The failure of this bill is that we're allowing the state to have an asset lease without a clause for public transportation using for free. At no cap. That's the major failing. But ultimately, the I-55 rebuild is 20 years in. We're gonna have to rebuild the entire thing in 15 years' time. This is the way we could actually have some of that infrastructure cost paid for by the private sector. It actually reduces the burden on us as taxpayers. The road's gonna exist. It's never gonna go away. It's always gonna be an auto solution,
Sure.
but a necessary one. So it's a matter of, is this a financially responsible way to actually move forward with reconstructing parts of the road? Yes or no? People have different opinions of that, but what I'm saying is there could be tangible benefits to this, but the devil's in the details.
Oh, absolutely. And like I said, speaking for the conversations that we've had internally, I think the procurement bill is really the scarier one. Because it's the fact that they don't have to consult CMAP. That they don't have to look at our neighborhood plan, that they don't have to talk to us. That's the part that's scary.
And you get an hour's notice.
Huh?
And you get an hour's notice of there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so let's go ahead and move on. Thank you. That actually was helpful as far as some of the other conversations. So Living Habitats is come on in, working with us on the riverfront infrastructure project, and we've got. Let me introduce Jesse. We're going to see a lot of him.
Hi.
And talk about some of the work that we've started doing with our grant, the Our Great Rivers grant, to look at bikes and the pedestrian infrastructure on the.
Thanks.
All right. Yeah.
Yeah, again, I'm Jesse Harmon, landscape architect with Living Habitats. We're super excited to partnering with you all, with Kate and Mike specifically. We've just got started, so I wanted to share some slides today about some of the work we've been up to. First and foremost, this is primarily going to be a planning study with a large component of public outreach. And with all good planning comes a lot of homework to get you, inundated with the details and acclimated to the neighborhood. So we've been starting to look at a lot of different plans, collection of some of the plans that we've looked at in the area related to mobility for pedestrians and bicycles, especially along the south branch of the Chicago River, but also including areas going into Kinley Park, Bridgeport, and the neighborhoods north. And just to kind of give an overview. Our kind of project study area, so to say, goes essentially from Daily Boat Launch east all the way to Kingstown Park. And the hopes of the study is to find out ways in which we can tie existing bicycle and pedestrian infrastructure together and connect it into the neighborhoods like I mentioned at various points that are small. We're also looking at other river sites of interest that have been identified by Great Rivers as other potential. All these you're probably familiar with. But again, going back to all the planning work that's been done, planning work that we're referencing, we know that we're not going to leave the offer all the great work, your ideas as well. And some of that includes turning back the clock and looking at the industrial layers, the other historical, cultural layers of this area. We really are just fascinated at, this being the nexus of the grain trade, the lumber trade, food, and hog butcher of the world at one time. And starting to peel back those layers and really pay homage to those different stories and different interesting aspects that we can start to allude to with our design and how they're connected to the neighborhoods of the living. And with that, also understanding some of the understanding some of the conditions of the river today, knowing that we're right, knowing that we're in an industrial area that dealing with stormwater issues, there's floodplain layers on here, etc. Looking at the river condition of whether it's a natural edge or whether it is a more armored edge. And starting to take stock of these different conditions, starting to identify opportunities and constraints relative to this kind of connective tissue. This is utilizing this one looks at again relative to industrial heritage. A lot of the combines overflows in the river. Kind of a concentration here, and then overlaying other kind of environmental patterns relative to air quality. And then also we're doing some boots on the ground research. We had the opportunity to tour the river with urban rivers. Kate and Mike were on that trip. I was on the pontoon as well, and took photos and took actually a GoPro video along the route, kind of documenting some of the river edge conditions. Seeing the activity on the river is also really interesting. A lot of fishing going on, a lot of boat activity, obviously, kayaks, pleasure boats, etc. And also just taking in from a different vantage point these interesting opportunities along the slips and even along the creek. I think everyone was kind of surprised at how almost verdant some of the areas were. Like they didn't seem overly industrial if you were in some ducks. So really an eye-opening experience to see from that standpoint. And then we also, here the next slide, took some time to bike the area, not only on the current pathways that exist, but also in and around the area, some of these streets that we were talking about just previously. One of my colleagues actually took a GoPro onto a bike and biked up most of the major arterials, Ashland, Western, and was very sweaty afterwards, obviously, and had to dodge a lot of traffic. But the footage came back and it was really interesting in itself, for like a video, obviously. The pictures without the words, the videos, like 10,000, just to see kind of from the vantage point of the bicyclist, even the pedestrian, it's a lot different than just Google Street View. Seeing that kind of time lapse of hazards and potential opportunities. So we're kind of analyzing that. We'll be able to share that in the future. So.
Yeah, what are some of the sites that after you guys got back to the office and analyzed that you thought were particularly interesting? I noticed ComEd right there.
Yeah, I think we were taken by I think that's a perfect example of what we found out there quite often. I think it's telling you, we have this kind of very skinny parkland space right next to like a very high security fence. And so because we're in this area, it's kind of obvious, but I feel like it's just, that's really indicative of so many different moments along the river. And I think along the boat trip, we saw that too, where the park would just abruptly end. Really just roughly end, either vacant lot or industrial facility. And it's obviously going to be a bit challenging. There's some areas that take some creative solutions to, again, create this kind of continuous pathway. But we think that, starting to think about this in a way that's not just in plan view, but really thinking about it three-dimensionally, because there are so many layers to the kind of infrastructure and network out here with bridges and flyovers from the highway, rail lines, transit lines, just the street river itself. It really lends itself to kind of a holistic, three-dimensional kind of analysis. So we're really looking to dive into those details. Another thing I'll point out, and I think I mentioned this to you, Kate, we really want to start to create a map or a series of maps that first look at these opportunity sites where, hey, there's space here on the bridge. There is adequate room to put a trail that would be out of the way of the ship traffic of the ship canal. Develop a series of maps that have kind of a spectrum of, low, medium, high, relative to complexity and these kind of facilities together. So again, just getting started, but really excited to work with you all. I guess I'll point out some kind of next steps. We're going to continue to obviously develop our analysis, collect materials along the way, visit the site again in the future. And we really want to, please reach out to me on the call that I can share with you. We really want to know, like, you have, experience in your own bike ride or walk around the neighborhood relative to challenges of connectivity. Because we can visit 100 times, but we're not, I'm not actually a neighbor here. So it'd be great to have more of those stories and voices heard. And to that, I know that we'll be working a lot with Kate and Mike further to develop an outreach plan in the months to come, relative to some public opportunities to gain feedback and to share our work and gain ideas.
So relative to that last point, UIC is going to come back this time for spring term. We're going to have an entire semester course for public engagement in relation to this project. Yeah. So we're very excited about that. And also give us, instead of like these summer events that we've had where we have 2 big events, and we get like that snapshot of feedback. This is going to be more ongoing this time to really see where people are at, and also hopefully to bring in a lot more new people, because this isn't going to be just McKinley Park. It's also, we're also working with our neighbors in Bridgeport and Chinatown to take this thing all the way up to King Tom, where we are hopeful that eventually it will join the southbound expansion of the Riverwalk that's coming from the loop down to Chinatown, also down to King Tom. And that's a slow moving project, but it has been given to go ahead. So this is potentially the opportunity to get all the way from here to the water, to the lake on the river, which would be really cool. Very cool if that situation. Not going to happen overnight, but it's a very cool idea, and it doesn't entirely feel like a pipe dream now. So very.
Yeah.
There are going to be some particular. Come on over here, grab camera. Right. There are going to be some particular challenges too with things like, and we're going to be very open and creative solutions to this, and also anybody who might be able to get us the right people on the phone for things like ComEd, where you can see this is the water on the other side of that substation, where there is also a maximum amount of space, but it's gravel and another security fence. And so, like, you can understand why we don't want anybody climbing the fence into the substation. Like, this is a legitimate safety issue. On the other hand, there's no repair for bike. How do we get them? Who do we have to talk to get them to let us do it? And so those are the kind of things that we will also be asking for help from neighbors. Because there's an infrastructure project and there's a social project, and we need both of them to go in order to. Living Habitats is gonna be with us. Living Habitats is gonna be with us for most of the year, probably through April, May of next year, so at least more than, and I wanna get very ready. So,
Absolutely.
thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. So now we just have a couple of general opportunities coming up. So, you know, our ward lines have been redrawn as of May, and so now if you live on the north side of 35th, you may be living in the 11th ward, or if you live on Marshfield, you may be living in the 11th ward. They have announced participatory budgeting. It's going to be the first of several committees. And so Alderman Lee is seeking residents who would be interested on serving on that committee. I don't have a whole lot of details about the obligation or the time commitment is, but they're hoping to get started by the end of this month. So if you live in the 11th ward, or you know someone who lives in the 11th ward who might be interested in participating in any of these things, participatory budgeting, infrastructure, zoning, economic development, and bicycles, please contact their office and volunteer yourself or your neighbor. They have asked the council to be available to occasionally weigh in on things, but this is really meant to be for like people as individual citizens to participate in these efforts, and that's a great opportunity. So please spread the word.
Happening.
Yeah. The city has also announced another couple of initiatives, including a new plan for the loop for the central. You know, the city is divided into 7 planning zones. We are southwest. The downtown is the central area, and so they are asking residents from all over the city to participate in their feedback for what are the priorities for planning for downtown. Not just the loop, but a bit into the South Loop and River North. What are the priorities for that area? And they have options like bicycles, public safety, traffic calming, like a whole list of things. The survey isn't that long, but they are asking everybody citywide to participate to get a good idea of what different people expect from downtown. This link was in the email invite for the meeting tonight, so if you missed it, you can go home and take that survey. Also true for the next one, which is the bicycle survey about on the project that Tony was speaking about. So that survey is also at the end of the email invite for tonight, and if you're interested in participating in that, if you bike at all, please do, because they need to hear like what cyclists actually want, what would make people feel safe, what are the priorities, and go ahead and blow them up and tell them we need work on our trip. And finally, upcoming neighborhood events. So this Sunday, a nonprofit called Chicago for Chicago will be offering a walking tour of McKinley Park. It will start at the L at noon. And you can get the tickets on Eventbrite. That one we haven't sent out yet because we just got the invite. But you can also Google it on Eventbrite, Chicago for Chicagoans. And I think it'll be interesting. The group is run by a couple of history buffs, including some people who have worked on other projects in the neighborhood, and particularly in the CMD. So I think that'll be interesting. I'm going to try and be there. I encourage you all to go. It is free. They accept donations. And why not? It's a nice way to spend a Sunday. The zoning meeting for 35th Street, as mentioned before, Wednesday, August 2nd. That is really, really important. We really want to show a good turnout because that is the first step in bringing small business back to 35th Street, is to get the zoning sorted out so that people are allowed to open a business on 35th Street. And then we get to go wrestle the landlords, but that's next. So first let's deal with the legal end of it, and then we'll go from there. So please show up for that and make your desires known. I think it'll be a really good conversation. And I think we also want to show support, not for any particular political leader, but for the fact that our political leaders are working together. And it's been a very long time since that happened, and we want to encourage that. This group, we're going to be on summer vacation in August. Our normal meeting time would fall during the first week of school, and that is just a time when people are going out to lunch. So we will not be having a meeting in August. And the first day of school is on the 21st, for those of you who remember that. Questions, comments on anything else that we've talked about tonight?
Okay, so I think the second to the
Yes, yes, that's true. We really do appreciate having people show up. So thank you. And yeah, please carry things back and then, you know, let us know where we can provide more information. Tell everybody do what they need to do. Is there anything else, any other 12 board events that you want to mention? Collections for migrants or anything like that?
Donations, they are.
Yeah. Okay, so no food, clean underwear, clean socks, and that's it.
Where can we drop off?
You can drop off the 12-foot office. We're on, Archer and drop off. Right to the buildings.
Oh, well, I'm there once a week minimum.
Yeah. Go right here, nice try. Right. We're there. Actually, regarding that, has there been any progress made in getting the correct 12-word office to show up on Google Maps? Yeah, there were, we need to get our own name first, maybe like a Google video, or it's like. Okay, that's signage. We're working on the awning, so we're looking at awning. We're thinking of having a grand opening at the end of the summer, so in August. Once we move into our official office, we have 2 storefronts, one is the government office, one is the political office. Space. For people like in there. But we got a ramp, right on the other side. So for everybody online, in case you can't hear that, the new 12th ward office is on Archer and Rockwell. They are hoping to be corrected on Google Maps, which currently shows multiple 12th ward offices. So if you're one of the people who's written us and been like, hi, how do I reach the elder person? They're working on it. 3868 South Archer. 3868 South Archer. All right. And with that, thank you everybody for coming tonight. We really appreciate you. And we'll see you in the fall.
Who cares, right?
Yeah.